Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Deals. Saturday morning, we wake up to some news that I don't think completely stunned a lot of Oklahoma fans, but has really sparked an interesting conversation for Oklahoma heading into 2025, and that is the Brent Venables going to be calling the plays for this defense in 2025. And look, my initial reaction here is there's probably nobody better in the country at calling a defense on a Saturday afternoon than Brent Venables. And so from just that perspective, yeah, I think Oklahoma fans are just fine with that, right? It's one of the best in the game. I think the concern that a lot of Oklahoma fans have is, does it prevent him from optimizing this Oklahoma program as a whole? Because you go across the country and you look at head coaches that have such heavy hands and call plays, whether on the offense or defensive side of the football, you do see examples of head coaches that maybe struggle to run the program optimally from that CEO approach. That's the conversation I want to get into. I want to get into the hire of Wes Goodwin and Nate Dreiling, and I'll just sneak peek at my take on Wes Goodwin. Dynamite hire, in my opinion. Look, was Wes Goodwin a good defense coordinator at Clemson? No, probably not. Is he an elite defensive mind? I think he is. And bringing him into the staff to game plan and construct and scheme up this defense, to me, I think it's dynamite. We'll get into that a little bit later. I want to focus on the Brent Venables story because I think that's probably where most of the discussion of the Oklahoma fans, that seems to be what they're having on the message boards and Twitter. Fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, one, to the Oklahoma fans, the amount of support y'all continue to show to the fellas, whether we talk the recruiting trail, storyline like this, 2024, y'all know we have a blast talking this football team. The amount of support y'all continue to show means the world. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, let it fly. Dill, I don't think we necessarily agree on this, so we're going to have a little bit of a discussion. I know for a damn fact that a lot of Oklahoma fans don't either. So I would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to look at it because I think both sides kind of have some merit here. Dill, I will give you the T-box here. And I'm going to start off with a question here. Just start from the top here. Surface level analysis. Brent Venables calling the plays for this Oklahoma defense in 2025. How are we feeling about it?
Yeah, I personally don't mind it. I look at what kind of happened under Ted Roof, where it seemed like they almost had competing narratives of what they wanted that defense to be. I don't think that worked. So if Brent Venables is going to be really involved in the creation of the defense, the scheme of the defense, the implementation of the defense, he probably should be the one calling plays because it didn't feel like it worked the way they were doing it before under Ted Roof. And that's probably why they went the Zach Alley route, where I don't know that they ever clearly said who was calling plays on defense, but it was probably
Did we know who was controlling that defense in 2024?
So, I mean, just logistically, I think it makes sense because you want him being involved in that defense. You want him being a big part of it. That is where he made his money as a coach. So I think at that level, you should probably want him calling plays just to make the transition smooth and kind of like everyone's going in the same direction where you didn't really feel that way under Ted.
And at the end of the day, what was one of the reasons you hired Brent Venables? Was because of what he's going to bring this program on the defensive side of the football.
And it got a lot better last year when him and Allie were kind of doing it. It was really done his way.
Look, if there's one thing I'm really confident in right now, we're going to pull up the depth chart a little bit later. I look at this defense. I look at how it's constructed. I look at where the talent is. And I said that's Brent Venables' defense. Elite in the front seven, going to be really aggressive with your linebackers. From a pure defensive standpoint, I look at it and say, I got no doubt this defense is going to be very, very good in the 2025 season. I'm a fan of that. Now, here's the question mark. And this is where I think it gets interesting is, Dill, you look, is Brent Venables having such a heavy hand in the defense going to prohibit him from being that CEO that's optimizing every single aspect of this Oklahoma Sooners football program? Because you look across the country and you see examples of when head coaches have so much responsibility on one side of the ball or the other, sometimes it doesn't, right? I think Billy Napier is a really good example. You look at Billy Napier's track record, tenure at Florida. One, I don't think he's that great of an offensive coordinator, period. But more importantly, you see a lot of time management mistakes. You see a lot of other things in the program. They're saying, hey, that's probably not getting done the right way. And it probably has a little bit to do with on Saturdays, you got your head coach buried in the play calling sheet. I think Lincoln Riley is a very good example. And then here's a good example of a very good play caller giving up those duties in Ryan Day, becoming more of that CEO as a national championship. Does Brent Venables having such a heavy hand and now calling the plays on the defensive side of the football, does that worry you in terms of him optimizing this program from a head coach CEO standpoint?
See, and I don't know, because really the one big stumbling point that Brent Venables has hit is he failed miserably in his coordinator hires on the offense side of the ball when Jeff Levy left. Like that's fundamentally what took that program back. It feels like
Yeah, agreed.
I look, they recruit well, they don't lose good players to the portal. Like Lincoln Riley has those problems you look at, like, oh, there's obviously an issue with recruiting, there's an issue with retaining players. Like those type of things make you kind of question. Because I don't think it's like fair to just correlate being the primary play caller on either side of the ball and having a bad program. Because like Steve Sarkisian does that at Texas and it works really well.
Yep.
I don't know that I think that's my main issue with the kind of his idea of not really hiring a defensive coordinator. Because at the end of the day, most things in Oklahoma are working, but they just missed really, really badly on the OC spot.
And yeah, sorry. And like from a personnel standpoint, like that offensive line was a disaster. And I'm probably a little bit more critical of Brent Venables as the CEO because I do look at some things and say the amount, and I don't know if it's fair to necessarily blame all of the injuries, but when you have that many, like maybe you're doing a little something wrong. Maybe you're doing too much in the winter. Maybe you're doing too much in the spring. And maybe we got to take a look at how this program is operating because when you lose the amount of players that this Oklahoma football team did to injuries, that's kind of an example of that. And I do think the retention in the transfer portal probably wasn't. You kind of said they didn't lose players they didn't want to lose. I'll look at it and say maybe they did a little bit. So
They certainly lost some offensive players, but again, that doesn't feel like a culture issue. That felt
yeah,
like
okay, it's
they
fair.
just could not move the ball. So it's like,
Yeah,
would Nick Anderson want to stay in that system? Like, yeah, they need a reset on offense. Arbuckle, I think, was the right hire, an exciting hire.
yes.
They bring in John Mateer, so they've put the pieces in place to be a really competitive team, I think. But I don't look at that program as like a real culture, like, ooh,
Yeah,
what is
fair.
going on in this place compared to certain places like USC. You certainly have some questions with some of those other programs. Like, yeah, you look, they lose coaches, they lose players, and it's like just kind of a mess. I don't totally feel that way with Oklahoma. I think they just missed in a really big way on that head coach.
Here's the one thing, and so I'm going to go in a little bit of a different direction because I do want to get this out before we talk about the hires. If you are an Oklahoma fan that is concerned like I am about Brent Venables being too involved in the defense and maybe lacking as that CEO head coach, one of the things that you can maybe quell your anxiety about, you might say, is that you did go out and just hire two sitting former defensive coordinators. And so when you look at what the game prep looks like from a week to week basis, Brent Venables doesn't need to be the guy at the head of the room in the defensive meetings because he has Wes Goodwin, who's done it now at a very big program in Clemson. Nate Dreiling was not only a sitting DC at multiple, but he was also a head coach at Utah State. And so you brought in two guys that probably take a little pressure off Brent Venables on a day-to-day basis, not on Saturdays, because they can probably run the defense and run those meetings a little bit, which takes a little bit off his plate. Like you look at Lincoln Riley and say, ain't nobody running those offensive meetings outside of Lincoln Riley. I think we all know that. That's probably what makes me feel better. Now I do want to get into Wes Goodwin and Nate Dreiling. Now Nate Dreiling, like that from everything you hear, just a riser in the coaching, and like people love him. I think the Wes Goodwin one, it to me is a more interesting one because he's a little bit more polarizing because he underperformed at Clemson. Like that defense was not good enough for how talented it was. And here's my take on it. Look, I think Wes Goodwin is a brilliant defensive mind. Is he a great play caller yet in his coaching career? No, probably not. It's probably why he's coming to Oklahoma, where it's like, hey, I get to be behind my protege again in Brent Venables, maybe learn a little bit more how he's going to be a good defensive coordinator, Wes Goodwin. He's going to be one. He's just wasn't quite ready for it at Clemson. There's difference between, hey, talking scheme and designing a defense and then getting out there on Saturday when the bullets are flying and being good DC. Getting Wes Goodwin back into that role of, hey, let's go Monday through Friday, or I should say Sunday through Friday. Let's work with this defense. Let's prepare these players. And then Brent Venables, you're going to call the plays because we know you can call them plays. I look at it and say this is a sneaky, really good hire because Brent Venables thinks the world of him. He fought like heck to get Wes Goodwin to come to him with Oklahoma. Dabo Swinney fought like heck to keep him at Clemson. I think Wes Goodwin's a brilliant defensive mind that certainly aligns with Brent Venables. And it's kind of that rehabilitation for him. I think he's going to be really good in the role that he's taken on at Oklahoma in 2025.
No, I think that's where the situation's kind of lucky for Venables, because I do look. My only issue with not hiring officially a defensive coordinator is I do think you cap the type of talent you can get into your coaching staff. And I know they kind of took a swing at Jim Knowles for sure. But like when you don't really give that guy the tag, if you will, like what Glenn Schumann and Dan Lanning, like, yeah, Kirby Smart was always involved in those Georgia defenses, but you also kind of knew Dan Lanning and Glenn Schumann were also very involved in guys who Kirby Smart.
I understand where you're coming from. I understand where you're coming from, but I also just look at it and say we just made two great hires.
But that's kind of why I say, like, in this odd situation, if you will, Wes Goodwin is not available to most coaches in the role he's taking at Oklahoma. Yes, You're right. Like Dabo Swinney thought a lot of him, and he is a coach that I think would have been highly sought after for certain roles. I think I look at like, well, they're bringing him in as an analyst effectively, so he's not like being given a tag that would be becoming necessarily of kind of the coach he is. Yeah. But it is kind of, in a sense, I think the way that it's set up right now where they can almost go the Alabama route where they'd hire guys like Sarkisian to an analyst role or a Bill O'Brien to an analyst role. Like that's a little bit unique. And I think Oklahoma can kind of do that and maybe nullify some of the concerns I would have is like, who's the other premier coach on that defensive staff?
I just don't think that because I look at it and say, I think that's it. Like, yeah, I know Oklahoma fans have some takes on some of the guys on that. I look at it and say, I think it's a great defense coaching staff. And for me, I don't really see any problems with it.
But it's hard to bring in a Jim Knowles or a Tom Allen or some of these like really premier coaches.
Do you think that's why they missed on Jim Knowles? Because I think Jim Knowles was like the only guy I think Brent Venables would have said, "Hey, you can come in and call the plays." And if it's not Jim Knowles, I'm the next best option, so I'm calling the plays. There was that why Jim Knowles didn't come to Oklahoma. I guess we'll never know. I don't look at it that my biggest concern again is like, can we focus on the things that still matter as a head coach too? And we'll see. But I do think bringing in two former defensive coordinators helps mitigate my concern for that. And again, at the end of the day, Dill, we don't have to talk about it too much. If you look at this depth chart, like
defense
the talent in the front seven, that's Brent Venables' defense. And that's that. There's nobody in the country I'd rather calling the plays for this defense that I see on my screen than Brent Venables. We'll close it out on that. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you. And please let it fly in the comment section. A lot of different takes to be had. And we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.